Chapter 1. The Omen That Passed in the Night. Imagine, if you will, the world as it was 66 million years ago. Not our world, not the familiar tapestry of continents and climates we know, but a planet that belonged entirely to others. This was the late Cretaceous, the twilight of a dynasty that had endured for over 160 million years. To grasp this span of time, you must understand that the entire story of Homo sapiens, from the first flickering of our species to the screen you are watching now, would be a statistical error in their timeline, a rounding error in their long, unbroken reign. This world was a hothouse, breathing a thick, oxygen-rich air. The poles were free of ice, and vast, shallow seas divided the continents, creating sprawling coastlines of lush, humid forest. This was a planet of giants. The sounds were of a different scale, the ground-shaking tread of a herd of triceratops, their armoured heads a forest of horns, the low, resonant calls of hadrosaurs echoing through forests of magnolia and cycad, the sudden, terrifying silence that fell when the apex of this world, the Tyrannosaurus rex, stepped into a clearing. It was a complete ecosystem, balanced on a knife edge of predator and prey, life and death, all unfolding under a sun that had seen their kind rise from small, scurrying reptiles to masters of the globe. In the skies, pterosaurs with wingspans of small airplanes coasted on thermal currents, their shadows passing over a world that seemed as if it would last forever. It was stable. It was whole. It was not waiting for us. Into this ancient, established world, a traveller was approaching. It was an object from the cold, dark void between the planets. A 6-mile-wide fragment of rock and metal, a relic from the birth of the solar system. It had travelled for billions of years, its path finally intersecting with this blue-green world. In our timeline, this is where the story ends, and where our own begins. The traveller struck the planet in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, a place called Chicxulub. The impact is beyond human comprehension. It was not an explosion, it was a geological-scale event, a sterile, cosmic act of violence. The asteroid and the crust it struck were vaporized instantly, releasing energy equivalent to more than 100 trillion tons of TNT. A flash of impossible heat scoured the continent, and the sky itself caught fire. The immediate devastation was absolute. Mega tsunamis, miles high, raced across the globe, scouring coastlines thousands of miles away. Trillions of tons of superheated debris were thrown into the upper atmosphere, raining back down as molten glass, turning the air into a planetary oven and igniting global firestorms. But the real executioner was the aftermath. The sky, choked with pulverized rock and soot, went dark. It may have remained dark for months, perhaps years. Photosynthesis stopped, the plants died, the herbivores that ate them starved, and the carnivores that ate the herbivores followed soon after. It was a great filter that favoured not the strong, but the small. The meek inherited the earth. The burrowers, the creatures that could hide from the heat and the cold, the animals that could eat the scraps of a dead world fungus. Insects, rotting roots survived. Our ancestors, tiny, shivering, nocturnal mammals, hid in the darkness and waited for the giants to fall. The dynasty was broken, but imagine, for a moment, a different path. Go back to that cosmic traveller, hurtling toward the blue-green world. In this new timeline, its trajectory is different. A tiny gravitational nudge from Jupiter millions of years before, a slightly different angle of orbit, a variance of a few thousand miles. In this timeline, the asteroid does not strike. It misses. It passes by the Earth, close enough to be a terrifying spectacle. A star that moves, a blazing omen in the night sky. The dinosaurs, with their keen, bird-like vision, would have watched it. Perhaps they bellowed at it, this new, bright god that blazed across the heavens, and then, as swiftly as it came, vanished back into the void. The planet holds its breath. And then, nothing happens. The asteroid is gone. The night gives way to morning, and the sun rises on the Cretaceous, as it has for 100 million years before. The KT extinction event never happens. The great filter is avoided. The Tyrannosaurus continues its hunt. The Triceratops herds continue their migrations. The pterosaurs still own the skies. The dynasty is not broken. It continues, unbroken, into the next day and the next million years. The tiny, shivering mammals, they remain in the shadows, their brief opportunity for dominion stolen before it ever began. They will continue to scurry in the undergrowth, a permanent supporting caste, forever living in the shadow of the true masters of the earth. This is the moment of divergence. Not a moment of peace, but of continued existence. Because the planet itself is not static, the asteroid was not the only change bearing down on this world. In the 66 million years that followed, the Earth in our timeline cooled. The continents continued their slow, tectonic drift. The great shallow seas began to retreat, and the ice ages began their cyclical march. The dinosaurs of this alternate timeline were spared from the fire of the sky, but they would now have to face the slow, grinding pressure of the ice. They are not frozen in time, they are unleashed. They now have the next 66 million years to adapt, to evolve, and to face a new set of challenges. They have avoided the sudden, violent end. Instead, they are now walking into a future where they must change or die. A future where, perhaps, the pressures of a cooling world would forge something new from their ancient lineage. Not just a new species, but a new kind of mind. Chapter 2. The Cenozoic that wasn't. In our timeline, the 66 million years that followed the impact are known as the Cenozoic era. It is, unequivocally, the age of mammals. With the great reptiles gone, the field was open. Our tiny, nocturnal ancestors exploded in a riot of evolutionary diversification. In the oceans, land mammals returned to the water and became whales. On land, they grew to colossal sizes, like the hornless rhinoceros Paraceratherium. They learned to fly, becoming bats. They specialized, becoming horses, cats, elephants, and crucially, primates. This entire, vibrant tapestry of life, the world that every human has ever known, was woven only because the dinosaurs were erased. Our existence is predicated on their absence. But in the world where the asteroid passed by, the Cenozoic, as we know it, never happened. The dynasty was never broken, and the niches were never vacated. For the mammals, this was a sentence of perpetual mediocrity. They remained in their ancestral roles, living in the cracks of a world owned by giants. They were the small, the nocturnal, the burrowing. They scurried in the undergrowth, their lives dictated by the thunderous footsteps of the true masters. Imagine one of our distant, shrew-like ancestors, frozen in terror in the Cretaceous night, its heart hammering against its ribs as the shadow of a troodontid passes. Now, fast forward that scene 10 million, 30 million, 60 million years. The mammal is slightly different, the dinosaur is slightly different, but the dynamic is identical. Without the ecological release, there was no explosive radiation. There were no great herds of mammalian herbivores, no saber-toothed cats, no dire wolves, and most importantly, there were no primates leaping through the trees. The evolutionary path that led to grasping hands, complex social groups, and upright posture was cut off before it could even begin. Our ancestors remained small, furtive, and hunted. They were not the heirs to the planet. They were a permanent, quivering item on the menu. But this does not mean the world was static. The dinosaurs, having survived their brush with cosmic oblivion, now faced a new, more insidious opponent: the planet itself. The Earth is never still. 66 million years of geological time would bring profound changes, and the dinosaurs, like all life, would have to adapt or perish. The asteroid would have been a quick death. This would be a long, slow, grinding war of attrition. The first great challenge, paradoxically, was not cold, but heat. Around 56 million years ago, our planet experienced the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM. For reasons still debated, a colossal amount of carbon was released into the atmosphere, triggering a runaway greenhouse effect. Global temperatures soared. The oceans acidified. It was a brief, violent fever spike in the planet's history. As reptiles, or perhaps more accurately, mesotherms, many were well suited to heat. But the largest of them, the true giants, would have struggled with overheating. This thermal spike would have acted as a filter, favouring smaller, more efficient body plans and perhaps pushing evolution in new directions for heat management. But this fever was temporary. The long-term trend for the Cenozoic was one of cooling. Following events like the Azolla bloom, a massive proliferation of freshwater ferns in the Arctic Ocean that drew down immense quantities of CO2, the planet began its long, slow slide into an icehouse state. The continents continued their tectonic drift. South America and Australia pulled away from Antarctica, opening the Drake Passage. This isolated the southern continent, allowing the Great Circumpolar Current to form. Antarctica was now alone, and it began to freeze, acquiring its massive ice cap. This was the first true filter. The lush, hothouse world of the Cretaceous was vanishing. The endless tropical forests began to retreat, replaced by temperate woodlands, grasslands, and coniferous forests. For the great dinosaur dynasties, this was a crisis. The giant sauropods, which relied on consuming unfathomable quantities of specific lush flora, would have seen their world shrink. Their numbers would dwindle. Many of the specialized herbivores, the classic hadrosaurs and ceratopsians of the late Cretaceous, would have struggled as their food sources changed or disappeared, and as the herbivores declined, so too did their apex predators. The mighty Tyrannosaurus rex, a specialist hunter of these large herbivores, would have found itself in an evolutionary dead end. This was not a sudden extinction, but a slow, agonizing fade. Over millions of years, the classic dinosaurs, the icons of the Mesozoic, would have been replaced by their descendants, new species adapted for this cooler, more seasonal world, or they would have simply vanished, their lineage ending in a final, quiet failure. Their reign was over, not by fire from the sky, but by the slow, inescapable creep of frost. The climax of this cooling trend was, of course, the Pleistocene, the Great Ice Ages. In our timeline, this was the crucible that forged Homo sapiens. In this alternate timeline, it is the final test for the dinosaurs. As massive ice sheets advanced and retreated from the poles, the world was subjected to violent swings in climate. This is the ultimate challenge for a reptile. But we know that dinosaurs were not the sluggish, cold-blooded lizards of old illustrations. They were active, dynamic creatures, and many, especially in the theropod line, were almost certainly warm-blooded. Most importantly, they had an adaptation that would prove to be the key to survival: feathers. We now know that feathers were widespread, from the tyrannosaurs to the smallest raptors, and in a cooling world, their original purpose display would have been secondary to their new, vital role: insulation. The dinosaurs that survived this second great filter, the Ice Ages, would look very different from their Cretaceous ancestors. The giant, leathery-skinned titans would be long gone, save for perhaps a few relict populations clinging to the shrinking equatorial jungles. The dominant dinosaurs of this alternate Pleistocene would be the ones that were pre-adapted for the cold. Imagine a vast, snow-covered plain, a herd of thickly feathered hadrosaurs, perhaps smaller and stockier woollybills, migrates across the tundra, their breath pluming in the frigid air. They are hunted not by a T-Rex, but by a pack of large, powerfully built dromaeosaurs. These are not jungle hunters. They are snow raptors, covered in dense, white plumage, their sickle claws adapted for gripping icy terrain. The world now belongs to the feathered, the warm-blooded, and the resilient. This new, harsh world did not just demand warmth, it demanded intelligence. Surviving a blizzard, finding food in a landscape buried under snow, coordinating a hunt for prey that is just as desperate and well-adapted. These are complex problems. The evolutionary pressure cooker that forged human intelligence was the changing, challenging environment of the African savanna, combined with the complexities of social life. Here, the crucible is the unforgiving, rapidly shifting climate of the Ice Ages. This environment would relentlessly favor problem-solving, cooperation, and communication. The mammals are still hiding, irrelevant in their burrows. The stage is now set. The classic dinosaurs are ghosts, and the new masters of this frozen earth are their hardiest, most adaptable, and most intelligent descendants. Chapter 3. The Rise of a New Intelligence. The Ice Ages were a relentless filter, a crucible that burned away the evolutionary dead ends and the luxuries of a stable climate. The world that emerged from this gauntlet of frost was not the hothouse of the Cretaceous. It was a harsher, more dynamic, and far less forgiving planet. The Titans were gone, their lineages broken by the cold and the collapse of their ancient food chains. In their place, the survivors, the feathered, the warm-blooded, the adaptable spread across the new, cold landscapes. And among these survivors, two groups, long-time opportunists, found their moment. They had always been intelligent. But now, in a world where food was scarce and survival was a daily puzzle, intelligence became the only currency that mattered. These were the dromaeosaurs and their cousins, the troodontids. To understand the revolution that was about to happen, we must first look at the biological hardware these creatures possessed. The dromaeosaurs, the raptors of popular imagination, were the planet's premier social hunters. Theirs was a collective intelligence, a gestalt mind forged in the cooperative pursuit of prey. In our timeline, their fossil remains trackways, showing coordinated movement. Bone beds, suggesting pack association, hint at a level of cooperation far beyond that of a simple crocodile. They were the wolves of the Mesozoic, and in this alternate Cenozoic, they became its reigning land predators. They had large brains relative to their body size, forward-facing eyes that gave them exceptional binocular vision for judging distance, and a complex social structure. Their famous sickle claw, so often depicted as a slashing weapon, was more likely a tool for pinning and restraining prey, an act that required stability, coordination, and an understanding of mechanics. In this new, cold world, they became snow stalkers, their plumage thick and white, their social bonds unbreakable. But their path, perhaps, was one of perfect instinct. A collective consciousness that was more like a superorganism than a collection of individuals. Their intelligence was a finely honed weapon, but it may have lacked the vital spark of abstract, individual curiosity. But there was another lineage, even more promising. If the raptors were the wolves, the troodontids were the crows or parrots, creatures whose intelligence was not just cooperative, but analytical, inquisitive, and perhaps even manipulative. Even by the standards of the late Cretaceous, their brains were astonishing. They possessed the highest encephalization quotient EQ, a measure of brain-to-body mass of any known non-avian dinosaur, a ratio comparable to modern birds and some mammals. Their skulls were large, with massive orbits suggesting huge eyes, perhaps for nocturnal or crepuscular hunting, granting them a sensory window into a world their rivals missed. Their inner ear structure suggests a keen sense of hearing and a sophisticated ability to process sound, to distinguish the faintest snap of a twig from the howl of the wind. They were small, fast, and light-boned, but their primary weapon was not a claw. It was their mind. Unlike the raptors, who were hypercarnivores, the troodontids were likely omnivores, generalists. This is a critical distinction. A generalist diet requires a different kind of mind. It requires remembering the location of fruit-bearing plants, knowing when the insects would swarm, understanding how to steal eggs, and also how to hunt. It is a mind that must hold a complex, multi-layered map of its world. In the old, stable world, this intelligence was a significant advantage. In the new, cold world of the Ice Ages, it became the critical path to survival. The Pleistocene presented problems that instinct alone could not solve. The rules of the hunt changed every season. Prey was scarce and migratory. Surviving a blizzard required more than thick feathers. It required foresight. It required the ability to imagine a future where one is cold and hungry, and to act now to prevent it. It required the ability to remember the location of a sheltered cave, to perhaps even store food for the lean times, to observe the patterns of the stars to predict the coming of the long winter. These new, complex challenges acted as an evolutionary accelerator. The pressure was relentless. The packs of raptors that learned to communicate a complex flanking maneuver were the ones that ate. But the family group of troodontids that figured out how to drive prey into a canyon, or how to break ice to reach water, or how to save the embers from a lightning-struck tree, these were the ones that survived to pass on their genes. Generation by generation, the feedback loop tightened. Better communication led to better hunts, which led to healthier offspring, which in turn supported larger, more energy-intensive brains. Language, which may have begun as simple chirps and threat displays, would have been forced to become more complex, incorporating new sounds for new concepts. Ice, snow, danger from above, wait, tomorrow. Social bonds, once forged for the hunt, deepened into something more: culture. These creatures were no longer just living together, they were thinking together. It is at this point, with intelligence on the rise, that we must confront our own reflection. In the 1980 seconds, the paleontologist Dale Russell, contemplating this very possibility, proposed a famous thought experiment, the Dinosauroid. He took a Troodon, endowed it with a human-level intellect, and extrapolated what 66 million years of evolution might produce. The result was a creature that has haunted our imagination ever since. This creature was upright, bipedal in the human sense, with a shortened neck, a bulging cranium, and large, reptilian eyes. It had 3-fingered hands, and it was green and scaly. Russell's hypothesis was a brilliant and provocative first step, but it was deeply, fundamentally flawed. It was a product of anthropocentrism, the unconscious bias that intelligence must look like us, that the shape of Homo sapiens is the inevitable container for a high mind. Evolution does not have a goal, and that goal is certainly not humanity. An intelligent dinosaur would not evolve to mimic a primate, a lineage that, in this timeline, remained a minor, scurrying footnote in the undergrowth. A theropod's body plan, with its horizontal posture and long, balancing tail, is a masterpiece of bipedal efficiency perfected over 150 million years. To abandon it for an awkward, top-heavy upright stance would be an evolutionary blunder, a clumsy solution to a problem that didn't exist. It would not lose its tail, a vital counterbalance for running, turning, and precise movement. It would not develop a human-like pelvis or a vertical neck. The Dinosauroid was a fascinating monster, but it was not a plausible life form. It was a human in a suit. So, let's erase that image. Let's imagine a more realistic, more alien, and more wonderful contender. Let's imagine a sapient creature born from the troodontid line, forged by the Ice Ages. Let us call them Troodon sapiens. They would not stand tall. They would stand long. They would retain their classic theropod posture, horizontal and balanced, a 2-legged predator built for speed and agility. Their bodies would be covered not in scales, but in a thick, dense coat of highly advanced plumage, perhaps with oily, water-repelling properties like a modern penguin's, providing essential insulation against the relentless cold. These feathers would be complex, perhaps brilliantly coloured in males and females, used for the intricate social signalling, status displays, and communication that now govern their lives. Their heads would be large, the cranium noticeably expanded, bulging not just at the back but upwards, housing the new, powerful brain. The massive, forward-facing eyes, but likely possessed a range of perception far beyond our own perhaps, seeing deep into the ultraviolet spectrum, a vital tool for tracking prey. Seeing urine trails, or identifying ripe fruit in the reflective glare of snow. Their hearing would be precise, the feathers around their ears perhaps forming a facial disc, like an owl's, to funnel the faintest sounds, the scurry of a mammal under a foot of snow, or the distant, melodic language of their own kind. But what of the hands? This is the great problem, the filter that has stopped so many discussions. Primates have hands. Theropods do not. How can a civilization be built without the ability to grasp, to craft, to hold? Troodon sapiens would have inherited the 3-fingered, clawed hand of its ancestors. It was a grasping tool, but not a manufacturing one. But 66 million years is a very long time. Over millions of years of selection, these limbs would have changed. The arms would be longer, more flexible, the hands more delicate. The 2 outer fingers might have become elongated, the claws reduced to flattened nails, while the inner finger, corresponding to our thumb, might have shifted to become partially opposable. It would not be a human hand, capable of a perfect power grip or precision grip, but it would be something new, a grasping, probing, manipulative tool, a raptor in the truest sense of the word, capable of holding a stick, weaving a branch, or napping a piece of stone. But they would not need to rely on the hand alone. We are locked in our own primate bias. We think the hand is the only solution. Troodon sapiens would have evolved a triad of manipulation. Like a modern crow or parrot, the hand and the mouth would work in concert. Their jaws, once filled with the sharp, serrated teeth of a predator, might have shortened. The teeth, less necessary for the initial kill as tools became more common, might have become smaller, more peg-like, adapted for a more omnivorous diet. The end of the snout might have even evolved a hard, dexterous, beak-like covering, a tool of incredible precision, capable of the finest manipulations, while the clawed hands did the heavy work of holding and bracing. And they had a third tool, their feet. Like their raptor cousins, their feet were strong, with a hyper-extensible claw. It is easy to imagine one holding an object down with its foot, working on it with its hands and beak. Imagine one holding a long shaft of wood steady with its foot claws, bracing it against its feathered chest, and using its beak to carefully scrape and shape a point. It is an alien, yet perfectly logical, form of engineering. And the sound. Imagine the sound of this new intelligence. Not the grunts and growls of a human ancestor, but something far more alien and beautiful. Their syrinx, the vocal organ of birds, would be highly developed. Their language would be a symphony of complex, melodic chirps, deep resonant whistles, percussive clicks from the beak, and perhaps throaty calls that could carry for miles across the frozen tundra. It would be a language of immense bandwidth, a tonal language where a single sound, shifted in pitch, could mean 10 different things. It would be capable of conveying not just simple ideas, but abstract thought, emotion, philosophy, and strategy. This is the creature that inherits the alternate Earth. It is not a man in a reptile suit. It is something utterly different, a being born of a different lineage, a different set of senses, and a different world. Now, picture a family of these beings, Troodon sapiens, huddled together for warmth in a snow-swept cave as an Ice Age blizzard rages outside. They are surrounded by the bones of their prey, their breath pluming in the cold. The wind howls, a deep, mournful sound. One of them, a female, is holding a piece of chert, a hard black rock. She is observing it, her huge, intelligent eyes focused, the pupils dilating and contracting as she turns it over. With her other clawed hand, she holds a rounder, harder stone. She is not just banging them together. She is thinking, visualizing the shape inside the stone. With a sharp, practiced click, she strikes the chert, the sound ringing out in the cave, the smell of struck rock, like ozone, filling the air. A flake of stone flies off. She holds the core up, inspects the new, razor-sharp edge with a tilt of her head, and lets out a soft, satisfied chirp. She has performed an act of prognostication, imagining a future need and creating an object to meet it. In the deep, frozen heart of a world that should have died, a new fire has been lit. The age of conscious thought has begun. Chapter 4. Building a Reptilian World. The first stone flake was not just a tool, it was an idea. It was the physical manifestation of abstract thought, a piece of the future, imagined and then willed into existence. For the Troodon sapiens who held it, the world was now divided into two distinct eras. The time before, when their bodies were the limit of their ability, and the time after, when their minds could create what their bodies lacked. This sharp-edged rock was the key to unlocking the planet. With it, they could cut hide that their teeth and claws could only tear. They could sharpen wood into a point that would never occur in nature. They could scrape sinew from bone and flesh from skin. They had, in an instant, transcended their biology, becoming something more than just another animal, struggling for warmth. But the great filter that separates a clever animal from a true builder is not the making of one tool. It is the transmission of that knowledge. It is the creation of tools to make other tools. This is where the primate body plan, with its 2 free walking legs, stable torso, and 2 specialized grasping hands, proved so obscenely successful for our ancestors. The Troodon sapiens faced a profound anatomical challenge. Their bodies were masterpieces of horizontal, high-speed pursuit. Their hands, those 3-fingered claws, were built for grasping and pinning. Their mouths, beaked and powerful, were built for snapping and tearing. Their feet were for locomotion and pinning. How could such a creature build a civilization? The answer was not in specialization, but in synthesis. They mastered what we might call the triad of manipulation. A human craftsman can sit, holding his work in one hand and his tool in the other. A Troodon sapiens craftsman could not. Their creation was a dance, an intricate, full-body process, and, most critically, it was often a cooperative one. To craft a spear, a vital tool for hunting the few remaining large herbivores from a safe distance, was a complex ballet. Imagine the scene. One individual, perhaps the elder of the clutch, lies on its haunches, gripping the long, dry shaft of wood firmly with its powerful clawed feet, bracing it against the ground. This individual is the vice, the living anchor. A second Troodon sapiens, younger and stronger, uses its own clawed hands to hold a heavy, hammer-like stone. A third, the most skilled, uses its precise beaked mouth to hold a chert stone core against the shaft's tip. At a sharp, chirped signal, the second one strikes, not the core, but a punch tool, perhaps a piece of antler from a mammal, held by the third. It is a slow, laborious, and deeply social process. This necessity for cooperation was not a weakness. It was the defining glue of their society. It was the forge of their culture. Their technology and their social structure were inseparable. To build, they had to build together. A lone Troodon sapiens was a clever predator. A clan of them was an emerging intelligence. They created other tools from this new understanding, awls, punched from bone with their new stone blades to pierce the thick, feathered hides of their prey, scrapers, held in their beaks, to clean the fat and flesh from the inside of those hides, needles, painstakingly carved from the smallest bones, for stitching those hides together with sinew. Their entire technological revolution was born from this triad. The brute force grip of the feet, the delicate manipulation of the beak, and the grasping, tearing strength of the clawed hands, all working in concert. This cooperative nature was tested to its absolute limit by the second great filter of sapience: fire. For human ancestors, fire was a friend. They were hairless, leathery, and could hold a burning branch. They could tend an ember with their tough, calloused palms. Fire was a tool they could hold. For a Troodon sapiens, fire was an existential terror. Their bodies, a brilliant adaptation to the Ice Age, were covered in a thick, dense, oily coat of insulating plumage. They were, in a very real and terrifying sense, flammable. Their fine, clawed hands could not hold a burning ember. Their racial memory, far deeper than any human's, would be filled with the screaming terror of forest fires, a primal fear of the smell of smoke. Fire was not a tool. It was a hungry god, a demon that consumed their kind. It is entirely plausible that their lineage could have ended there, a brilliant but fireless culture, forever limited by the cold, the dark, and the night. They would have remained prisoners of the caves, their technological advance capped. But they solved it. They did not tame fire. They imprisoned it. Their relationship with this element was never one of familiar mastery, but of distant, obsessive, and sacred respect. They would harvest the embers from a lightning-struck tree, a gift from the sky, not with their bodies, but with tools. This was the next great leap, creating technology to manage a force, not just a material. They created long, articulated hands of stone and wet, green wood, tools designed specifically to interact with the one thing their bodies could not. Their hearths were not the simple, welcoming fire pits of human tribes. They were elaborate structures of stone, deep, insulated, and intentionally separated from their living spaces. It was kept in dedicated, central, stone-lined chambers, often at the entrance to their subterranean cities, where the ventilation was best. This fire was communal property, tended by designated firekeepers. This may have been the first specialized role in their society, a role that was not about hunting or crafting, but about maintenance. These individuals, perhaps old, injured, or simply those with a patient, methodical mind, were the first priests. They used tools we would recognize: bellows made from the stitched, cured lungs of a hadrosaur to breathe life into the embers, stone tongs to move hot rocks, and perhaps even primitive clay or soapstone pots to transport live coals from one hearth to another. Fire gave them warmth, a radiant bubble against the Ice Age. It gave them protection, a wall of light against the few predators that still dared to hunt them. And, most critically, it gave them cooked food. This final gift unlocked a universe of calories from tough plants, tubers, and meat, fueling the most expensive biological hardware in existence. their massive, growing brains. With stone tools to cut and fire to cook, their population stabilized and grew. The ancient, grinding pressures of simple survival gave way to the new, complex pressures of living together. The simple pack, held together by the hunt, evolved into something more complex. The clan or clutch, a multi-generational family group, became the core of their society. This was driven by the long, vulnerable childhood of their young. A large-brained species cannot be born ready to run. Their offspring, their clutchmates, would be helpless for a long period, requiring communal care, protection, and, most importantly, education. Language, that symphony of whistles, chirps, and clicks, exploded in complexity. It was no longer enough to say danger or food. They needed words for tradition, how to, remember, and imagine. With their avian syrinx, their language was likely tonal, a song language where pitch and rhythm conveyed as much meaning as the word itself. A rising, staccato chirp might be a warning. A low, resonant whistle could be a sign of greeting. But a complex, multi-minute song could be the oral history of the clan, the story of the Great Winter, or the precise, unvarying instructions for the ceremony of the firekeepers. Their knowledge, now too complex to be passed on by instinct, had to be taught. The elders of the clan became the most valuable resource, the vessels of this new, oral culture. They were the living libraries, teaching the young the precise, multi-step process of knapping a blade, the complex, tonal song of a peace offering, the dangerous, sacred dance of tending the fire. Theirs was a society built not on hierarchies of simple dominance, as their raptor cousins might have, but on hierarchies of knowledge. The most valuable member of the clan was not the strongest hunter, but the oldest individual who remembered where to find the churchstone after a long snow, or the one who knew the song that calmed the nervous hatchlings. This growing, complex society needed a home. The open plain was too dangerous. The Ice Age was too cold. Simple, open-air nests were a death sentence. Caves were a good start, but they were limited in number, often damp, and hard to defend. The Troodon sapiens found a solution that was perfectly, uniquely suited to their biology and their world. They were already adept at digging for burrowing mammals, their primary prey in the winter. Their powerful, clawed feet were natural shovels. Now, they began to dig for themselves. They became a civilization of excavators. Their cities were not the vertical, sky-reaching structures of humanity. They were the opposite. They were vast, subterranean complexes, invisible from the surface, save for a few well-camouflaged and fiercely defended entrances. These were not the damp, cramped tunnels of a mammal's burrow. They were vast, communal nests, dug into stable earth, expanded from existing cave systems, or hollowed out of glacial ridges. The work was communal, a frantic, cooperative digging that involved dozens, their powerful, clawed feet throwing streams of dirt, their hands and beaks shaping the tunnels, their claws scoring the walls. They followed the logic of ants or termites, but imbued with conscious, intelligent design. They carved chambers for different purposes, a true architecture of the negative space. There were large, communal sleeping chambers, lined with dried moss and feathers for warmth. There were nurseries for the clutches, the most protected and warmest rooms, deep in the earth. There were food storage chambers, natural refrigerators in the permafrost. There were dedicated, chimney-like ventilation shafts, a critical innovation that drew smoke from the sacred fire chambers and brought in fresh, cold air. These nest sites were masterpieces of passive climate control. Deep underground, the temperature was stable, a constant, insulated bubble, safe from the raging, negative 40-degree blizzards of the Pleistocene surface. Here, in the dark, warm, and noisy chambers, lit by the flickering, smoky light of pitch-soaked reeds, their civilization truly began to flourish. But a growing, stationary population faces the final, Malthusian challenge: food. A bad winter could wipe out the surface-dwelling prey, starving the nest city. The Troodon sapiens, as natural omnivores, diversified. They had to. They brought their food source with them. They had already conquered the underground, and they realized they could farm it. They were not farmers of wheat or corn. Those plants needed a sun they had foreseed. They became the world's first and greatest mycologists. In vast, humid, temperature-controlled chambers, warmed by geothermal heat or the proximity of the fire chambers, they cultivated enormous farms of fungi. It was a discovery born of observation, watching fungus grow on the waste they left in the tunnels. Now, it was a science. They would drag rotting wood from the surface, a dangerous but vital task, inoculate it with spores of their favoured species, and tend their crops in the lantern light. They herded vast colonies of cave-dwelling insects, raising protein-rich grubs on composted waste from the city. Their agriculture was alien, lightless, and perfectly adapted to their new, subterranean life. They were no longer just hunter-gatherers. They were city builders and farmers, a true civilization hidden beneath the ice, while on the surface, the last of the giant, unthinking dinosaurs, unaware of the new power growing beneath their feet, faded toward extinction. Chapter 5. Coexistence on a giant planet. A human city, even an ancient one, is a statement of dominion. It is a space carved out of the wilderness, a zone where the rules of nature are suspended and the rules of humanity are imposed. It is a place of safety, a declaration that here we are the apex, and the monsters are kept outside. This is the fundamental assumption upon which our own civilization is built. We achieved this by being the only player in the game. We arrived in a world where the megafauna was vulnerable, and we proceeded to eliminate it. The mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, the dire wolves, they were cleared away, leaving the world empty for us to build upon. The Troodon sapiens never had this luxury. Their civilization was born in a world that was still, and always would be, ruled by giants. Their nest cities were not statements of dominion. They were fortresses of survival. Their intelligence did not grant them mastery of the planet. It granted them the privilege of not being immediately extinguished. This is the great, defining difference of their world. They were not the first, and they were not alone. They were a sapient species, forced to share a planet with its original masters. The surface of the planet, the world of sun and ice, did not belong to them. It was a shared hunting ground, a contested territory, a place of profound and constant danger. When a Troodon sapiens hunting party emerged from its hidden, disguised tunnel entrance, it did so with a silent, military precision that was born from 60 million years of terror. They moved in perfect, feathered camouflage, their bodies dappled to match the snowy rocks and hardy conifers. Their song language was hushed, reduced to low, percussive clicks and subtle feather flashes that were invisible to larger eyes. Because the Ice Tyrant was still here, the Tyrannosaurus rex, that icon of the Cretaceous, had not simply vanished. Its lineage had been forced through the same climatic filter as everyone else. The T-Rex of 66 million years ago would have frozen or starved in the Pleistocene, but its descendants had adapted. This was a new, evolved monster, a creature we might call Tyrannus glacialis. It was perhaps slightly smaller than its ancestor, more compact, but infinitely hardier. It was covered in a thick, shaggy coat of primitive proto-feathers, a mottled, dirty white insulation that rendered it nearly invisible in a snowstorm. Its metabolism was high, its senses acute, and it had learned, over millions of years, that these smaller, two-legged, tool-using creatures were a source of high-energy, protein-rich food. It would stand utterly still for hours, its massive head tilted, listening for the faint, subterranean sounds of digging, or the click-click-click of stone napping echoing up through the permafrost. This was the unending arms race. The Troodon sapiens developed technology not for expansion, but for defense and stealth. Their greatest innovations were born of fear. They invented poisoned spears, not just for hunting, but for self-defense, dipping the sharp, bone points into potent neurotoxins they had learned to cultivate from their subterranean fungi farms. They became masters of traps deep, camouflaged pits lined with sharpened stakes, powerful spring-loaded snares of cured hadrosaur sinew, and rolling log deadfalls set on unstable slopes. Their engineering was defensive. When a hunting party was stalked by a Tyrannus glacialis, the engagement was not a battle. It was a running, strategic retreat, a desperate attempt to lead the monster into a prepared kill zone, to use their minds to defeat a creature of impossible, ancient power. More often than not, they simply failed, and the hunting party would be lost. a stark reminder that the world above was not their home. But the predators were only half the problem. The Troodon sapiens also had to contend with the environment itself, and in their world, the environment was alive. The sauropods, the long-necked titans, had also survived. Their lineage, too, had adapted. These were not the gentle giants of our picture books. They were tundra titans, colossal beings that dwarfed even their Cretaceous ancestors, their bodies armoured in thick, elephantine hides and insulated by a layer of blubber that could be feet thick. They were forces of nature, living mountains of flesh, and they migrated in herds that numbered in the hundreds. They were not malicious, but their very existence was a cataclysm. A single migrating herd could destroy a century of forest, shift the course of a river, or cause localized earthquakes with their footsteps. For the subterranean nest cities, a sauropod migration was the equivalent of a carpet bombing. The Troodon sapiens could hear them coming for days, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the earth, a sound that brought a primal, bone-deep panic. If a herd passed directly overhead, the vibrations could collapse tunnels, crush chambers, and bury hundreds of individuals. A city could be snuffed out in an afternoon, not by malice, but by simple, oblivious weight. This constant, two-pronged threat, the intelligent predator above and the colossal destroyer on the move, dictated the entire path of their technology. Humanity, free of rivals, built outwards and upwards. The Troodon sapiens built down and away. Their technological path was one of subtlety and invisibility. Why did they become such masterful geothermal engineers? Because their nest cities had to be dug deep, far below the frost line, and more importantly, below the stomp depth of a migrating titan. They tapped the planet's internal heat, not just for warmth, but for survival. Why did they perfect subterranean agriculture? Because any farm on the surface would be an open invitation to every herbivore and the predators that followed them. Why did they not have roads, skyscrapers, or wagons? Because such things were just bait. They were signposts that screamed, "Here we are! Food! Eat us!" Their greatest technological achievement was not the wheel, but the silent, undetectable ventilation shaft. Their greatest work of art was not a statue, but a perfectly camouflaged tunnel entrance. And what of us? What of the lineage that, in our world, would one day claim the planet? The shadow of the dinosaurs, which in our world was lifted 66 million years ago, remained a permanent, suffocating blanket. The niches for large-bodied mammals, the herbivores, the carnivores, the primates, never opened. There were no grassy plains for ancestral horses, no great forests for primates to conquer. The African savanna, the cradle of humanity in our world, was here a desolate, windswept plain, patrolled by snow raptors and hunted by the Tyrannus glacialis. The primates, our ancestors, remained exactly what they were in the Cretaceous. Small, nocturnal, tree-dwelling, in the few equatorial jungles that remained, or burrowing insectivores. They were shivering, terrified, big-eyed creatures, living in the absolute margins of the world. Australopithecus never took its first step. The evolutionary pressures that would have driven it from the trees never existed. The descent of man was an opportunity, a statistical miracle that required an empty world. In this world, the world was full. Our entire lineage, with all its potential for art, philosophy, and hubris. A creature that a Troodon sapiens might catch with a simple snare and find barely worth the effort of eating. This is the world, then, 66 million years after the asteroid missed. It is a planet in a strange, tense equilibrium. The dino-sapiens, the Troodon sapiens, are intelligent. They are a true civilization. They have language, culture, art carved into the deep walls of their cities, and a complex, growing technology. They are perhaps on the verge of a true industrial revolution, perhaps harnessing geothermal steam for power, or developing advanced chemistry from their fungal farms. But they are a minority power on their own planet. They are not the masters of the world. They are the intelligent, strategic, and terrified tenants. They are a sapient species that must forever check the sky for ancient predators and feel the earth for the footfalls of living gods. They are the mind, but they are surrounded and ruled. Chapter 6. The Unseen Empire. 66 million years. It is a span of time that is, for the human mind, functionally indistinguishable from eternity. Our entire recorded history, from the first cuneiform on clay to the digital light of this moment, is a mere 5,000 years. Our industrial revolution, the engine of our global dominion, is a fleeting 250. To project human progress across a canvas 66 million years wide is to paint a picture of incomprehensible, godlike power. It is to imagine a civilization that has transcended its own biology, conquered its solar system, and perhaps even begun to reach for the stars. But this is the flaw of our primate imagination. We assume that progress is a universal, upward and outward-facing arrow. The Troodon sapiens of this alternate Earth are a testament to a different path. Theirs was not a story of conquest, it was a story of survival, of coexistence, and of finding a different kind of mastery. For 66 million years, their civilization was shaped, compressed, and governed by one inescapable fact. They were not the strongest thing on their planet. The giants, the Tyrannus glacialis, and the tundra titans had remained. This constant, existential pressure did not extinguish the Troodon sapiens. It perfected them. It was the governor on their engine, the filter that prevented the rise of the very hubris that would one day define humanity. The modern world, 66 million years after the missed asteroid, is therefore a planet of profound and stable duality. The surface world is a grand, brutal, Pleistocene plus ecosystem. It is a vast, cold wilderness of tundra, ice sheets, and hardy coniferous forests, broken by a narrow, lush, and dangerous equatorial band. The giants still walk. Herds of tundra titans, evolved to an even more colossal size, migrate in continent-spanning paths. Their footfalls a drumbeat of geological time. The ice tyrants, Tyrannus glacialis, are the apex predators, lonely, shaggy, and terrifyingly intelligent hunters. The apex of 66 million more years of predatory evolution. The surface belongs to them. It is a world of muscle, instinct, and sublime, terrible beauty. But beneath the surface, hidden from the sky, lies the unseen empire. The Troodon sapiens never conquered the surface. They abandoned it. They turned their gaze inward and downward, and in the warm, stable, and safe heart of the planet, they built their true civilization. Their modern world is a global, subterranean network of nest cities, connected by high-speed transit tunnels bored deep through the crust. They are not a population of billions, for their fungal farms can only support so many. They are, perhaps, a stable, sustainable population of a few 100 million spread across the planet's mantle. To visit one of their cities, you would not see a skyline. The entrance is a whisper, a disguised hole in a rocky cliff face, or a hidden opening in the roots of a giant, genetically modified cycad. The air at the entrance is warm and humid, smelling of damp earth, ozone, and a strange, musky, fungal scent. It is not the harsh, focused light of a fire or a bulb. It is a living light. The walls of the tunnels, carved not from dead rock but grown from living, hardened and self-repairing mycelium, are threaded with bioluminescent bacteria. They pulse with a soft, blue-green glow, responding to the sound of movement, the light rippling ahead of you in a soft, welcoming wave. The city itself is not a collection of buildings. It is a single, integrated, biological organism. Imagine a cavern a mile wide, its ceiling held aloft by massive, living pillars of mycelium that draw nutrients from the rock itself. The architecture is flowing, organic, and perfectly efficient, like the inside of a bone or the structure of a coral reef. There are no straight lines, no brutalist concrete, no steel. Their technology is not mechanical, it is biological. They did not have an Iron Age or a Bronze Age. They had a fungal age, a bacterial age, and now, perhaps, a true genetic age. Their tools, their homes, their very infrastructure is grown, not built. The inhabitants, the modern Troodon sapiens, are sleeker, more gracile than their Ice Age ancestors. Living in the constant, stable warmth of the deep earth, their thick, insulating plumage has receded, becoming a coat of fine, downy feathers. Almost like velvet, they retain brilliant ornamental feathers for display, iridescent flashes of colour in the biolight. communicating status, lineage, and emotion. Their large, slitted pupil eyes are perfectly adapted to this low-light world. They move with a silent, bird-like quickness. Their song language a constant, low, and beautiful thrum that fills the city, a sound like a symphony of flutes and oboes. Their energy is not chemical, but geothermal. They are the masters of the planet's internal heat. Their cities are built around deep thermal vents, which they have learned to tap and regulate with obsessive geological precision. Their greatest science is not physics, but geology. Their priests are not philosophers, but seismologists who read the planet's rumbles and predict the shifts in the mantle. Their engineers are geneticists who spend their long lives patiently modifying fungal spores to create stronger walls or brighter light, or a new, more nutritious food source. Transport between cities is not by air or sea. It is by bore tubes, deep in the crust, far below the stomp depth of the tundra titans. They have harnessed volcanic pressures and magmatic flows to create a network of vacuum-sealed tubes. Pods, perhaps also grown from biological composites, are propelled through these tubes on cushions of superheated steam, travelling at hundreds of miles per hour. They have connected their entire world, but they have never laid a single road. And what of the world they left behind? The surface. It is their heaven and their hell. It is a place of legend, the great open, the killing sky. They go there, but they do not go there lightly. Hunting parties, encased in tough, biologically grown armour that mimics the rock and ice, still make the pilgrimage to the surface. They hunt the great beasts. Not for sustenance, their fungal farms are sufficient, but for essential, rare materials. Minerals, specific isotopes, and, most importantly, genetic code. They hunt a Tyrannus not for meat, but for a sample of its blood, a key to understanding a new, powerful enzyme. These hunters are their astronauts, their heroes, venturing into an alien world, and many do not return. Have they looked up? Have they seen the stars? For a species that lives underground, astronomy would be a bizarre and dangerous pursuit, but intelligence is curious. We must imagine that they have skykeepers, an ascetic, perhaps slightly insane, order of scientists. These individuals live in fortified, camouflaged observatories built into the peaks of the highest, most remote mountain ranges. They live in constant terror, their structures built to withstand the casual swipe of a Tyrannus. From these high, cold, lonely places, they have charted the heavens. They have done it for millions of years. They know the moon. They know the planets. They understand gravity. They have seen the other galaxies, and they have seen the omen that passed in the night, their ancestors' god. They have charted its long, elliptical orbit, and they know, with mathematical certainty, that it will one day return. But their reaction is not to build spaceships. Their entire psychology is defensive, inward and downward. Their solution to a cosmic threat is not to flee into the sky, a place of monsters. It is to dig deeper. It is to reinforce the nest cities, to perfect their geothermal shielding, to make their civilization so deeply embedded in the planet's crust that it could survive the sky falling. This, then, is the unseen empire. A 6 million-year-old civilization, unimaginably old, stable, and wise in a way we could never comprehend. It has achieved a perfect, sustainable balance because it was never allowed to dominate. The great predators, the Tyrannus and the Titans, were not a curse, they were a blessing. They were the governor, the cosmic filter that prevented the Troodon sapiens from developing the hubris of humanity. They prevented them from overpopulating, from waging global war, from developing technologies that would foul their own nest. The giants were the predator that kept the prey, the mind, sharp, humble, and alive. The Troodon sapiens are not looking at the stars with ambition. They are listening to the heartbeat of the earth, their god and their home. They have achieved something we only talk about in our most idealistic fantasies. A permanent, sustainable, intelligent civilization. Their existence is a quiet, hidden triumph, a silent empire of mind, living in the heart of a world of muscle, forever hidden from the light, and perfectly, completely, at peace.